So I do like reading various different blog posts from time to time, and I found a new one, basically by an interesting blog called Slugger O'Toole. And this one, I feel, more than anything, Brexit is really hard to define. Because if you try and tell someone, you know, or if someone asks you what's going on with Brexit, it's really hard to say what the hell is going on, because even you look at even politicians and you say, well, I just don't know what's going on. So this is Brexit Woes and a Broken Parliament, a perilous path ahead for British democracy. So, Theresa May's withdrawal agreement has been rejected multiple times in Parliament. The EU says it can't be renegotiated, but that's beside the point. Despite two series of indicative votes, MPs refused to back any alternative version of Brexit. There also wasn't enough support for a no-deal Brexit, nor revoking of Article 50 to cancel Brexit altogether. In other words, Parliament rejected all options available. There were none left. Even those who opposed the withdrawal agreement cannot fairly blame it for the current deadlock. The results of a twice failed parliamentary manoeuvre provided that there was never any deal that Theresa May or anyone could have passed in the current Parliament. Yet, the Prime Minister cannot be pardoned for her 2-year reliance on a fractious coalition which once propped up the government but now renders her powerless. The DUP and her allied Tory rebels now hold the legislative process hostage by demanding Brexit, opposing a hard border and decrying the backstop at once. The positions that contradict each other by definition. And for those where there were no plausible, and for those for which there were no plausible solutions, those MPs are guilty of either an Orwellian level of doublethink or a woeful dishonesty about their real priorities. So it's up to you, really. You know, you've got to take your pick on that one. But if you can't decide, this might help or not. The DUP previously expressed their desire for a frictionless border and a comprehensive free trade and customs agreement with the European Union in their 2017 campaign manifesto. Yet, subsequently, they have opposed a customs union with the EU and a customs union which would have been the only outcome that they came remotely close to satisfying some of the party's contradictory demands. Ken Clarke's proposal for that exact arrangement was also shy of only 3 votes, shy of majority, which the DUP support. The scales could have been tipped towards an orderly Brexit, but why follow your own standard stated policy objectives when you could just not? To Labour's credit, their party has supported overwhelmingly and voted to support various alternative proposals, even ones that they don't perfectly match their preferred outcome. Yet after their defeat of Labour's own Brexit plan and all other options they supported, Jeremy Corbyn now seems content to mostly just remind us that his rival's plan was rejected too. The weakness of the leader of the opposition is that while he is indeed opposes the Prime Minister with great gusto, he can offer no other way forward either. There seems to be a broad willingness to exchange the country's well-being for another day's worth of partisan soundbites. Each of the main factions, since the parties are the modus operandi right now, has virtually ceased proposing new alternatives. The priority now is simply for Group A to oppose Group B's ideas, and if those ideas go beyond to Group A yesterday. So, as Brexit appears increasingly likely to end in calamity, many MPs retreat further ahead into hardline ideological positions. They've opted for the invocation over compromise and self-preservation over pragmatic solutions, fearing the potential fallout inherently in every plausible Brexit outcome. It's a destructive, self-fulfilling prophecy, a high-stakes parliamentary vision of a pensioner's dilemma, which the public is losing all sides, which loses all sides of the outcomes. We therefore cannot allow ourselves in a vicious. We therefore find ourselves in a vicious cycle of political paradoxes. No deal, but no deal. No Brexit, but no second referendum. No Conservative Party, but no Labour. But hey, forget that first bit, right? Without diminishing its importance, Brexit is now a sideshow, and much a symptom of a much more serious issue. The UK is experiencing a genuine democratic crisis. No one knows what might happen next, let alone what should happen next. Although the word unprecedented, and I'll agree on that, unprecedented has been tweeted non-stop for nearly 3 years now by every journalist in Britain. We really are in uncharted territory now. Theresa May has now been granted a longer extension by the EU and is currently engaged with Jeremy Corbyn to find a compromise. These are both extremely positive developments. However, the central issues outlined above remain unresolved. Until a deal is reached, it is hopeful, but not unlikely, that the current talks will produce an entirely unique Brexit proposal. Barring such a breakthrough, any May-Corbyn compromise would likely consist of one or more proposals that were previously rejected individually by MPs during the indicative votes process. And we should pray that both parties agree upon a joint plan and or MPs change their current stances and back a course of action, no matter what course that may be. But assuming the continued absence of this ideal outcome, and thus is still on, Theresa May is still unable to break the deadlock. Here are some of her only manoeuvres left. So option 1. Continue grinding away at vote deficit. Theresa May could keep pleading with Tory rebels and try to find anything to offer the DUP that would secure their support for the current withdrawal agreement. This is probably the worst option, and it is least likely to succeed, and I think that's generally what's going to keep on happening. I think we're just going to keep on grinding through this until sooner or later someone just goes, right, we're going to have a vote, and if this vote loses, then we end up in a no-deal Brexit. If this vote wins, then Article 50 is revoked, Brexit doesn't happen. I think that's honestly what's going to happen. I think Theresa May, if I were Theresa May, I would go, okay, this is what's going to happen. Vote now in Parliament, do you want a no deal? Because that is the only way to solve this deadlock. And you basically go, if you vote for a no deal Brexit, then okay, I will carry out a no deal Brexit. Now, what she should say next is, if this vote loses, then I will immediately withdraw Article 50 and Brexit will be stopped. That's it, it will be dead. That's generally what she should do. She should just pull the trigger and just see what happens. Because that's the only notion we are. And we know in Parliament there is no appetite for a no deal. So that's essentially what she should do. But there you go. And is the most likely result in a no-deal Brexit. The legal default would force a free-fall departure from the EU, and the indicative vote suggests that there may be zero consensus for a Plan B if MPs find themselves in the final hour without a deal. Pursuing the same old strategy as before would therefore continue the current game of parliamentary Russian roulette. This time with far worse odds. The UK has been lucky so far, twice receiving extensions from the EU to avoid disaster. Yet, one must wonder, if that look could survive a potential third request. Nor should an automatic / default no-deal exit be viewed as a solution. Even if you think that the exiting the EU on WTO rules is ideal, failing to pursue that route via legislative decision would still represent a non-functioning parliamentary democracy. So option 2, call for a general election. This would likely be the next logical step forward. It addresses the broader issue of a hung parliament and comes closest of how an impasse is meant to be resolved. However, while a general election would adhere to expected political norms and conventions, it would not guarantee a favourable outcome. The chaos of the past 2 years, combined with public fury over the current state of things, could produce unexpected election results that break the deadlock. But it's also distinctly possible that a new parliament would make matters even worse. Voters in Leave constituencies outraged by a twice-delayed Brexit could try to replace moderate Tories with hardcore Brexiteers. While this isn't inherently a bad thing, it does reduce the likelihood of a compromise if new MPs are elected on a strictly ideological mandate. Labour MPs face a similar task. Most represent constituencies that voted Leave and shouldn't expect to receive an enthusiastic welcome home after Labour reversed course to back a continued freedom of movement. It is also unlikely that any party would win an outright majority. The building of a coalition government might prove impossible, and any agreement would likely be contingent on a shared vision for Brexit, which brings us straight back to square one. In the event that Labour overtakes the Conservative Party, they would face the additional challenge of convincing potential allies to put Jeremy Corbyn in the captain's seat. That would not be an easy task. Parliament is broken, but an election based on an unresolved Brexit woes might deepen the cracks even further. There must be another backup plan prepared in case of a parliamentary shuffle results in the same old dance as before. Option 3. Call a second referendum. If compromise is unattainable and a general election does not break the deadlock, then Parliament will have failed as a political institution. By extension, parliamentary democracy will have failed the UK as a system of governments. This is said without a hint of exaggeration, sectarianism, or alarmism. Should that dire situation arise, a second referendum would be justified to legislate via direct democracy instead. There are many fair criticisms of the first referendum that should be considered if the Prime Minister is forced to craft a second referendum. Chief among them, an oversimplified choice between the false dichotomy of Remain and Leave. These two choices did not give Britons an opportunity to clearly express their will in 2016. The ballot never provided a chance to vote on various things that Leave could mean, or was the issue adequately addressed in debates and media analysis. The actual options are far too distant and too numerous to actually place under a single umbrella. And we've been saying that for years. We were saying that before the referendum as well. And this is why Leave ran such a various campaign. You know, no one on the Leave side actually campaigned for a no-deal Brexit. That was never on the table. They always campaigned for a deal or remaining in the single market and customs union and being like Norway. No deal was not talked about, and yet now it's in vogue. So any second referendum must therefore provide a range of specific, well-developed choices. It may be necessary to allow voters to select multiple options or implement preferential voting. In addition, MPs must commit to supporting the public's decision, this time regardless of their preferred outcome. But there are still grave dangers associated with this path. Although the first referendum suffered from a lack of detailed options, and a second referendum might suffer from an overburden of choice and information, the current withdrawal agreement includes nearly 600 pages of complex political and legal information. And this is something that I think you can argue very, very well. That the last referendum, no one knew what the hell they were voting for, because no one of the British public was that well informed about the EU and the benefits it gave us prior to the vote. And that is still the case now. Many people throughout all this reporting process are just realising, oh, I didn't realise the EU gave us that. Oh, I didn't realise we could do that under the EU for the very first time. And there you go. So, what about other leave options? How many should be included on the ballot, and how should they be chosen? If there's no consensus in the referendum results, or the margin of victory is simply minuscule, should there be a subsequent runoff referendum for the top two choices? Even if all those issues are resolved, there is still the obstacle of successfully communicating the justification for a second referendum. Many critics, including Leave and Remain supporters alike, view the existing People's Vote campaign as nothing more than a thinly veiled Remain 2.0. Whose only intention is to cancel Brexit even at the cost of pragmatic solutions. The above criticism isn't entirely unfair, especially when you look at the groups currently backing the campaign. It also makes a new referendum tough to legitimise across the political spectrum, even for the new and distinct purpose of providing a democratic solution to the parliamentary impasse. Therefore, the new justification for a second referendum must remain distinct from the original consensus. The People's Vote campaign, this is not a redo of the first vote, nor is it an option that anyone should be proud to implement, but it may become the only democratic route left to resolve a system-wide institutional failure. If an option to revoke Article 50 isn't on the ballot, expect accusations that the government has deprived Britons of a fair choice. On the flip side, offering revocation as an option would prompt fierce criticism from Brexiteers for ignoring the original mandate to leave. Either way, it's possible that the large swathes of the country would reject the results of a second referendum as politically illegitimate. Although the current situation is already a democratic crisis, such an outcome would be the final nail in the coffin. The choice facing Theresa May is unprecedented. No matter what happens, next Parliament will undoubtedly be asked to stomach plans that are less than ideal. Whether MPs barrel forward towards the cliff edge or steer to safety is anyone's guess, but the road Parliament chooses will have grave repercussions that reach far beyond Brexit. Continued infection is in itself a choice, and by far the worst one. Refusal to compromise would be an active decision to further downgrade the UK's political institutions, perhaps irreparably. And I agree. And here's the thing. And this is the thing that everyone should realise, because the first referendum was so close, there was only a margin of 2%. So anyone who thinks that that is somehow a clear victory, you are completely barking up the wrong tree. That is a narrow victory. And the first thing, I've said this before and it's been echoed before in the past by other people, the first thing David Cameron should have done was he stepped out on that morning. He should have gone, okay, people want to leave, but people also want to remain. So what we're going to do is we're going to go with the Norway option. We'll leave politically, but we'll remain with all the institutions. That's what he should have done. And now you have a situation where Brexiteers are basically saying, we don't care that we only just managed to scrape across the line. We are going to do all the stuff we wanted, but none of it's what people voted for. And this is them pushing a no deal. And you look now, as I said multiple times, look at the Leave campaign, running a campaign, and the unofficial campaigns as well, basically shotgunning every single option out that they could to try and get as much of the vote they could. They never released a roadmap, and that is on them. We are in this mess because of the Brexiteers. They should have had a plan, and they should have presented one at the referendum of what's going to happen. Now, there's something else that I think would be an entirely fourth option, and I think it would be entirely justified. I think we should revoke Article 50. Now, I'm not saying that we revoke Brexit completely. What I'm saying is, let's revoke Article 50, and then this gives us time to have a breather. This gives us chance so that we're not running a million miles an hour, flying out options left, right and centre. What I believe should happen is that the people who ran for Brexit, that's the people behind the Brexit campaign, should then be forced to come up with an actual plan. What should then happen is that when they have that actual plan of how they are going to do Brexit, and bear in mind we know Theresa May's current Brexit plan, they should then go back to the EU with that plan saying, is this plan acceptable? If the EU says it is acceptable, then this is what happens. We have another referendum, and we go based on the Brexiteers' plan versus remaining. That, I think, is a perfectly valid option. And again, you would need to have certainly the political will to actually be able to force the Brexiteers into actually being able to do some sort of concrete plan and then go to the EU. But one thing that I think is certain is that Article 50 must be revoked, because we cannot do these negotiations, we cannot do anything while you are essentially sitting on a ticking time bomb. And no one wants a no-deal Brexit. We know that. We know that completely. And even now, as I've said multiple times, if you got everyone who voted to leave and you polled them about which option would win, I guarantee you it would be the Norway one that would win. No deal wouldn't even get a look in. It wouldn't even be a close vote. Because many leavers during the campaign wanted to stay in the single market and remain in the customs union. The problem is that if you stay in those institutions, you then have to follow the rules. These are rule-based systems, and you cannot break or bend the rules, or else the entire system falls apart. So, like it or love it, you have to follow the rules. Even in the UK, you have to follow rules that are set by the UK government. And you know, all this stuff, by the way, all these rules and regulations were voted on by the UK Parliament, whether they wanted to implement them or not. And they always voted overwhelmingly to implement them. The only ones I want to point out that have been rejected by the UK are ones to do with anti-tax avoidance. So that sends, I think, probably the largest message in this video.